would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it. All right, today I'm linked up with Jennings Ingram, green-eyed food forest goddess of Maui, Hawaii. She's a designer, eco-consultant, and podcast host of the amazing podcast called Regenerative Revolution. I don't know you super personally, but I think we definitely align a lot in terms of our passions. I just love the existence that you seem to create for yourself, and I highly respect you in terms of what I see you out there doing. You seem like somebody who sees problems and seeks to understand how they are created and then what can be done to solve them versus just becoming upset about them. And you're definitely very solution oriented, at least as far as I could tell. And your podcast, I think it's a big part of that solution with all the various individuals that you have on there. And you definitely do a really great job facilitating it. So compliments to you on that. And yeah, thank you for coming on here and welcome to the podcast.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I was so flattered to be asked on. And yeah, you're totally right. In terms of focusing on solutions, that's really what drew me into the work of environmental regeneration and really regeneration at all levels of beingness at this point on the planet. Because I think, like a lot of people, I started to sort of become more aware of the large levels of dysfunction at many different levels of society. And there's only so long that any one person can spend just getting upset about that without kind of getting tired of just being in that place, right? So from there, that sort of combined with my other parts of my background led me into pursuing a career and my interests in environmental regeneration.
Beautiful. I love it. So there's a few things that you wanted to discuss. One of them was planetary pattern literacy. Where do we begin with what is meant by planetary pattern literacy, and how may this be useful?
Yes, absolutely. So planetary pattern literacy is really interesting because the earth is kind of constructed in, like, the earth has a language. The earth has a way I'll say, expresses herself. And of course, like, this is infinite, right? There's so many different ways that this happens. But in terms of broader scale planetary pattern literacy, there are certain shapes, cycles, and things that are pretty obvious. Like when you zoom out into a more macro lens, that are not widely understood. And I believe that that is part of why we're sort of in this situation where a lot of our civilization and structures and the way that we even travel around, the way our homes are built, they are causing damage, is because it's not in line with this planetary pattern literacy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I think definitely when you mention just something as simple as like the architecture, the way that things are built, and the kind of like with the people might be familiar with like feng shui principles and just how energy flows through a room. I think that's a good example too. You could definitely tell the difference when you're in a structure that facilitates a good energy flow versus something with a lot of sharp angles and kind of feel more boxed in, and it's just not a very natural, flowful environment. Is that kind of some similar things along those lines what you're speaking to? Or?
Yes, well, that experience of flow of when you're in an environment that is feeling conducive to life, right? Like a lot of us only experience that in small areas, like if we're in a home that's well designed or things like that. But actually, the opportunity that we have is for the whole planet to be designed that way. And I think it probably would be helpful if I gave a couple examples of like what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
So, pattern wise, right, we're going to go probably macro to micro here. Pattern wise, there's something called a torus. It almost looks like a an apple core. And it, or if you see it in 3D, it looks like a donut. And that's kind of the way that energy, in my understanding, the way that energy moves on the planet. A great example of this is a tree. Like if you think of a tree, not just the parts that you see above ground, but also the roots, that has that toroidal structure. And then when you like think about how a tree functions, you know, it like drops its leaves, those get absorbed by the roots, and there's this whole kind of like cycling thing that happens. And that cyclical nature of the way that organic matter is supposed to move, it happens like also within our own beings, right? We're eating from the landscape. Ideally, you know, we're breathing out carbon dioxide that's feeding the plants. Also, what we excrete is supposed to go into this this cycling way that the earth functions. So that's kind of that's one sort of a way to look at it. And then when we look at like for example the water cycle, right? So the water cycle is meant to be this full cycling loop. Like these things are very curvaceous, they're very feminine, they're very it's a full bodied thing, right? And so a lot of the water cycle is like um, not being honored in modern design because it's supposed to be rain is formed in a variety of ways. Some of it is from evaporation from the ocean, some of it is from transpiration, or it forms from nuclei that are released from tree leaves. But basically, you know, the clouds form, rain falls, and then what's meant to happen there is rain. The rain is meant to seep back into the ground, and that's kind of the place where we're having difficulty with our modern design that's leading to a lot of desertification. um, it's supposed to seep back into the ground, recharge the aquifers, recharge the streams, be held in plant roots, things like that, and then be free to continue back up in that cycle, right? And loop like that. So the kind of toroidal cyclical way that our planet functions is it's real, and it's kind of, I see it as sort of like it's the rules of how things run here. And we're sort of trying to flagrantly, I don't think we knew, right? In terms of the way that humanity has structured modern society, I don't think that we knew the severe consequences of like what would happen if we didn't acknowledge these cycles and designer societies around them. But we're seeing that now, right? We're seeing the drought and the flood and the fire cycles. We're seeing, you know, the ocean acidification. We're seeing these effects. And it's wild to me because they're so reversible. And so it's like a lot of people are not aware that things are not functioning the way that they're supposed to, and that this is understandable, and B, that this is reversible. And I'm just like, wow. So that's kind of like what I'm basing my work around.
Yeah, I love it. And this is an area I'm not super strong on, but it is something that's becoming increasingly interesting to me, learning about the kind of shenanigans with the water and how it's all rerouted and all the different dams. And it's something that I was listening to been watching some different videos on recently because I'm out here in Arizona, and I was just like curious about, how all of the water and how it all flows in from different areas, and kind of following the different dam systems that are created. And it goes all the way up, well, one of them at least, up to I think like Montana. And it just made me wonder, what would be how would things be different if we didn't create all these dam systems, but we allowed the water to flow its natural path and then designed our our living situations around it. But it seems like where they kind of screwed up was that they started developing all of these developments early on, and then are just kind of now reaping the repercussions of that. In your estimation, does that seem like a plausible assessment?
Yes, totally. I love you're thinking right along the right lines there. And there's an amazing guy in Arizona. His name is Brad Lancaster. And he was thinking about similar things along the lines of, assessing the water situation in Arizona. And he realized, I think you guys only get it's low. It's a low amount of inches of rainfall per year. And I can't remember the exact number, but he did the math. And if the rainwater that fell in Arizona were properly captured and worked with, there would be no need for outside water to be pumped in and used.
Yeah, it's pretty
And
wild.
that is something that, yeah, people don't understand, or not a lot of people go there in their brains, much less like the people who are engineering and running cities, because it's a shift, right? I think a lot of what we're being asked in this moment is, can we shift our minds? Can we shift our ways of being, um, to align more with what actually is? And so the way that you are starting to kind of think about, the water needs in Arizona, that's it's really valid, and I think you probably would really like to connect with Brad Lancaster a lot.
Absolutely. That sounds awesome. And I think another issue it could potentially be, as the system has already kind of been established and is in place, it has created a lot of systems around it. And there's probably, profit incentives to keep things in place as they are, because there's a lot of people and they have a lot of jobs that revolve around everything as it is. And I think, like you had mentioned about breaking that cycle, it's more about educating people, letting them know what's possible, giving them the information, and then hopefully hoping that people jump on board and start redirecting things. So I would definitely love to be in touch with that guy that you had mentioned for sure. It seems really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot more empowerment available to people than they realize, right? Like when, um, our friend who I just mentioned started doing this work in Arizona, it was actually illegal, right? Because he was noticing when it would rain, all the water would run down the street into the storm drains. And so he just on a Sunday with his brother, cut the curb with like whatever type of saw can cut concrete, and started redirecting the rain into these like basins planted with native trees. And once the city saw the effects of how amazing the trees were growing and how it was preventing flooding in the storm drain system and all the things, then they've actually like adopted it as a policy, in his area. So, anyways, I just think there's so many things that we can all do, and it's like, um, it's really vast, and it's actually really diverse and exciting, and it's a good moment to be awake to that and be basing your some of your choices around that, because it's only going to become more relevant through our lifetimes.
Definitely. Oh, something I did want to bring up that's kind of similar on that note too is like mountain water used with mountain water or something like that. And my buddy lives in Colorado. So I sent him and I asked him, I said, "Hey, is this actually made with mountain water, or what's the deal with it?" Or it said Colorado water or something along those lines. And he's like, the corporation has the rights to the rainwater, and in that specific area where they're collecting the rainwater, it's illegal for other people to harvest the rainwater. And I was like, well, that's one of the issues right there, is that if anybody's in a position to where they're able to get rights um, legally to where it's preventing people that are living in that area, in whatever neighborhoods at their own homes, and they're not able to collect rainwater. That's just crazy to me. And I haven't followed that up, but I'm definitely going to look more into that because that's one of the big ones.
Yeah, that's gnarly. I hadn't heard of that. It doesn't surprise me,
Yeah,
honestly, but it is definitely alarming.
for sure. And then so kind of like when you're talking about the cycles of things and you're kind of referencing the toroid, is that the right word? Um, it kind of reminded me a little bit
Yeah,
of
the
the
Taurus. Yeah.
yeah, Taurus.
Taurus.
Yeah, it reminded me a little bit of the kind of like the infinity logo, and then I think there's something similar in the imagery of the permaculture symbol. Do you know what I'm talking about? And I'm
Yes,
wondering
I
if
absolutely do.
that might have something to do with kind of that alluding to that notion of that cyclical nature and all. But just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was permaculture was the area of study that I was introduced to like planetary pattern literacy through. And so Bill Mollison had a whole lecture, it still exists, but his original lecture series from, um, I don't know what year it was, kind of a long time ago. And in that he demonstrates the Taurus and kind of he also talks about some of his psychedelic experiences going out in nature and seeing these patterns really echoed in all these different landforms and occurrences in nature.
Yeah,
So
for
that was
sure.
where I learned about that.
And then so in terms of mythical and ritual origins of aligning with the elements, that was something else that you had mentioned to me. Sounds super intriguing, building a relationship and a deeper connection with the elements is definitely something I'm interested in. So, what could be said about some mythical or ritualistic origins in regards to elemental alignment?
Yeah. Well, this is a really deep and rich subject. And one that was actually such a relief for me to learn more about because sometimes as I walk in the world with this sort of eyes that you develop when you develop your ecological literacy and attunement to these things, it can feel almost, I just feel weird. I'm like, gosh, I can't believe, this is designed this way or just it's you're just looking with a different set of eyes, right? It's like you've learned a language. And so when I learned more about the history behind this sort of alignment with nature that I don't fully embody. I wish I did, but we're all still kind of living in this modern world now. And for me, I feel oftentimes like I have a foot in both worlds. But when I started to learn about those origins, I felt okay, like I this isn't a new thing, right? This isn't like aligning with earth and the elements. It's actually the way that humanity evolved to be in a lot of ways. And we see this demonstrated across many different historical cultures. One that I love to reference is Minoan culture. This was a society based around, it was not matriarchal necessarily, it was more egalitarian, but some people will call it matriarchal, but it was egalitarian, peaceful society where life was pretty much structured around alignment with nature, right? There weren't, like, if you look back at their fossil records, there weren't, there big armies or lots of weapons or anything. There were a lot of areas of like gardens and shrines for connecting with nature. And the landscape was really intelligently managed. And we see that through a lot of different cultures. I mean, here, so I want to say, like, I'm not Hawaiian, And I think it's really important to just acknowledge like sensitivity around um, there's only so much information that I can give about Hawaiian culture because with respect and due to my literally just not being Hawaiian. However, what I have learned is their whole society was based on what's called an ahupua'a system, which was like basically community based land tenure, where slices of each island were managed very intelligently from the top of the volcano down to the ocean. And it was completely self sufficient, right? At that time, they didn't have imports, they didn't have any of the things we have going now. And yeah, there's many different examples through history. That's two. So just when I think of that, I'm like, all right, this is it's new, or it's like modern ancient, right?
Yeah.
To come back
Future
to this.
primitive. I love it. The Hawaiian culture is one that I don't know much about at all, but something I'm really interested in, and I would love to learn a lot more. I remember a while
Me
back
too.
I was watching some video of, it seemed like they were preserving some of their traditions, and they had these festivals or something on, I think it was Molokai Island, and it just all seemed
Okay.
really interesting. And then so in terms of resurrecting some of that for modern day, I think that that's probably some of the stuff that you're probably up to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So this kind of across across different cultures, across the whole as far as I understand it, like backdrop of humanity up until the agricultural, like industrial revolution, a lot of things were not everywhere, right? But um, many aspects of society and life were totally based around earth care and seeds and the cycles of the moon and these really beautiful things that make sense with, like I was saying, like just the way that our planet is designed. Um, so how do we reapproach that in this modern moment? That's a really good question because it's in a lot of ways, it's like the task at hand. And it's also one answer that we give a lot for like in design. And I don't really use the term permaculture anymore because I also have like an environmental science background and different things. But um, an answer that we gave a lot when I was doing just particularly permaculture design, and I think it still applies to a lot of situations, is it depends, right? So everybody's level of involvement with bringing back this kind of ritualistic, connective way of relating with the earth in their modern lives is going to depend on where you live, your climate, your lifestyle, your desires, your inspirations. Something that I see that some of you may listening may relate with is I feel like sometimes earth like related things, right? It kind of gets lumped in the category of yard work and then it becomes sort of almost like a masculine construction project. And like, oh, we're gonna build this bed or make a rock pathway or something like that. And actually the invitations are a lot more um nuanced and there's a lot of diversity in how we can approach that. And so I think that that's a little maybe circuitous, but I think it's important to just name that, right? And um, so some of what I do is I help people look at what is your situation? What are your goals? What do you want to be eating? You know, in what ways do you spiritually connect to this work? And then we look at what they've got, right? Maybe they just have a balcony. Maybe they have 20 acres. Maybe they have just future dreams for where they want to be. And we figure out um, how they can integrate this work into their lives.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like regenerative agriculture, it's kind of this new terminology, but pretty much the original way things operated. And I mean, just even hearing people talk about regenerative agriculture and farming these days, those words are like music to my ears. And it just makes me so happy to see these subjects even discussed more and more. I'm someone who's pretty invested in terms of the amount of podcasts that I listen to. And I see these subjects emerging more and more every day. And it's just really cool, as they should, given the state of the times that we're in. It's really where it's at these days in terms of some of the most important and valuable information that people can seek to understand, as well as the most important and
Yes.
impactful practices that people should be engaging in. And like with permaculture design and holistic management, this is a big focal point of yours in terms of your goals and offerings. This seems like the fun part, being able to, get creative and kind of design a beautiful, harmonious, and like complementary system. Although sure there's a lot of knowledge and work that kind of goes into everything and understanding the different plant relationships and all of that. Maybe you can touch a little bit on what it's like designing and managing a holistic system of this sort, and why would somebody be interested in doing such a thing?
Yes, absolutely. Well, okay, so a couple important things so when we're working with, yeah, designing like a diverse system, like a food forest, my Instagram handle is Food Forest Goddess, which is um, kind of funny, but I'm just like, I'll keep it. But it's about community, right? It's about plants working together and growing in a symbiotic system. There's a diversity of species that you choose to both provide food that is, nourishment for the people, as well as to provide, for example, like organic matter for the soil and food for pollinators and things like that. So it's essentially the process of, communicating and checking in with the clients, the people you're working with, or yourself if you're doing this work with yourself, and seeing, okay, what do I want to grow? What am I interested in? What foods do I want to have in my diet? Seeing, like, assessing the situation that you are physically in. So, what is your climate like? What is your zone? What is your rainfall? What's the wind situation? All that. And then taking it to the level of, okay, well, how do I actually want to put these species together? How will they be easy for me to access in my life? When I think about their lifespans, how do I want to stack these species in time, right? We're working with something called succession. So succession is like the muscle of nature. So it's like nature always wants to be growing up into a forest, basically. That's a successional muscle. So when we are creating a food forest, we are tapping into the forces of succession to create a forest that is extremely abundant with food and medicine, basically. So it's you're designing for lifestyle, you're designing physically the space, you're designing for, and then you're designing in time, right? A lot of this, you plant baby trees, they don't come to fruition right away. So you're stacking all of these things together. And then, of course, it's a living system, right? So it's constantly fluctuating. in relationship with it. So that's another kind of piece of it. Is that's one of the reasons why I a lot of designers will kind of come in and make a concrete plan of like, this is how you are going to do this, and um we're going to make a beautiful drawing and we're going to take you from through that. And that does work for some people, especially if you have like an installation crew and everything. But my experience has been more, the ideal food forest or living environment for each person is going to be as unique as the person. And there's not actually anyone who can fully design that for you, because it's a process of like of personal discovery and personal um, growth, and a literal manifestation process of like growing your dreams. So that's why now I've kind of stepped back from straight up like, we're going to go in and design your projects, to like, I'm going to support you as you design your lifestyle and your project, and help you kind of like help people lead themselves through that, because it is very personal and it's very beautiful.
Yeah,
That was kind of a long answer, but
I love it. That's a beautiful answer. So one of these words that I came across that I'm not familiar with, so I wanted to ask you, it was agroforestry. What's the difference between agroforestry and food forestry?
agroforestry is a methodology of food forestry. Basically, it's mostly, in my understanding, a lot of it is from or originated in Brazil. Agroforestry, this guy Ernst Gosch, um, and there's an amazing video called Life in Centropy that people can watch if they want to learn about kind of the sort of beginning of the modern agroforestry movement. But it's a lot of what I just described. It's working with succession, planting trees. A big part of agroforestry is like you're planting trees to feed other trees because they're being chopped and mulched and worked into the system. That's something that also happens in food forestry too. So it's kind of like all these words are a little, words in general actually are fairly restrictive, because it's like a static thing trying to describe like an ever-changing reality. So agroforestry, food forestry, permaculture, syntropic design, environmental design, whatever you want to call it, it's, you know what I mean? It's almost, the wording isn't so important. It's more
Yeah,
about the what's
definitely.
being done.
Yeah, this is truly the cure to so many issues, I think, and internally as well as societally, I feel, with, the rates of consumption and the trappings of corporate capitalistic markets, just working with the land and your local environment and your local communities, it kills like 10 birds with one stone. Or you could flip that and you could say, it allows 10 birds to thrive with one seed. I think that's probably a better way of putting it, because it brings so many people together, and you're outside with the
Yes.
elements, and you're getting vitamin D3 from the sun, you're building the soil, you're building your soul, you're learning how to generate your own food, becoming more independent, less dependent on stores, where you're at the whim of economic inflation, as I'm sure many people are familiar with nowadays. um, the food sovereignty notion is gigantic. If you eat animal products, create a little space and get some goats and some chickens, and you're gold. Food and water is everything, in
Yeah.
my opinion, and what we consume and take in, and the quality of that, and all that comes with it, it really informs somebody's being. Yeah, again, the food sovereignty thing is so huge, and it's just the notion of the substances that we consume and how they inform our consciousness. I would also love to get your take on kind of how you feel about, in terms of things informing our consciousness, like psychedelics and plant medicines, because I think that that's kind of an interest of yours, or something that you speak to. And yeah, so any insights or interesting thoughts that you have in terms of psychedelic plant medicines
Yes.
and the gifts that they offer.
Yes. So a few things, right? Yes, we were speaking about psychedelics and kind of the relationship with that. So I did an interview with where my guest was saying, well, all plants are inherently psychedelic. And I found that to be true. But my own kind of personal journey with healing and my connection with plant medicine has been really almost unexpected in a way. Like I'm not one of those people who sought out like I'm going to go to Peru and I'm going to do ayahuasca and I'm going to, open my mind that way. It didn't happen like that for me. It kind of snuck up on me actually like um so I guess more broadly I'll say I think psychedelic medicines, plant medicines are extremely healing and can be extremely healing. I think it matters a lot how they're administered and what people's mental state is going into that and all of that, right? So, um, my kind of experience with it was when I moved here to the island, and I can't share too much about this because it's a little bit, um, you know, the whole entire story is really crazy. But basically, I ended up with a really unique opportunity to be part of a group that regularly drinks ayahuasca out here. And there were interviews, there was a whole process of to kind of like see if I could sit with them. And they ended up inviting me. And I decided that I would. I was scared, but I really felt like I want to know. I want to know what this is like. And what I found on the other side of that was a lot of what I had already kind of felt and suspected through my life, which is that everything's interconnected. Um, there's so much more to reality than what we see in our like everyday lives. And we are for sure being guided by something larger than ourselves. And so, um, I guess on a more kind of practical, like life level, in terms of the use of psychedelics in my life, it's been so I ended up sitting with ayahuasca 6 times, and I may be good on it for the rest of my life, to be honest with you. There's something that people say, like, once you get the message, hang up the phone.
Mm-hmm.
But what it did for me was it removed, I feel like, a lot of my um, sort of, how do I want to say this? Toxic loops that my brain would get in. Um, and somehow rewired me so that I am not as prone to like self doubt or depression or things like this. And it's been very powerful.
Wow.
And I, depending on where people are at, I would recommend it as long as you are with someone who can really safely hold that space. Like the people that I did this with are from Brazil. The practitioner had been sitting with the medicine for over 40 years. And so um, that made me feel really safe. And I knew that if something crazy started to happen, like I would be taken care of. Yeah. So that's a
Absolutely.
small kind of, but I think psychedelic healing is like one level of a lot of levels of healing that need to happen in the world right now, right? So like if we all just go to fly to Peru once a year, do ayahuasca in the jungle, have a transformative experience, but then just go back to the status quo, that's not actually going to change anything, right? But if we, you know, have psychedelic experiences, we learn from them, we also take it upon ourselves to study and practice, ways of becoming a better human, like meditation, various spiritual practices, and then also extending that out beyond ourselves to helping to heal our local landscapes. I feel like that is kind of like the multifaceted sort of call right now. And personal healing and psychedelics is for sure interwoven into that, as far as I can see.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. I'm really glad that you shared that. I wanted to ask you a little bit about mycology and like mycoremediation because I think I was listening to I listened to a number of your podcasts and they were all so good and but one of them you kind of got into the mycology stuff with the mycoremediation and I think you were saying along something that I kind of had I had this idea. It's kind of just a general idea that a lot of people probably have in terms of, say, like mushrooms and their ability to cleanse different systems, which I think they definitely do have a lot of potential in that regard, but it might not necessarily be as easy as we think it is. And I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on what are some interesting things that you've learned exploring the different ways in which mushrooms may be able to help facilitate things like that.
Yeah. Well, my understanding, okay, so mycology and all of that is a very, I've got some good friends who are mycologists, and they're very passionate about it, and they're very like, I'm not a mycologist, and so to try to speak in too much depth about it would just upset my mycologist friends. So so I won't. But what I will say is my understanding is that it is possible. And there are, I have friends who have worked on micromediation sites, and it's definitely possible for, fungi to participate in sort of bioremediation is kind of a better way to describe it, is like utilizing plants and fungi to help to restore degraded and toxic environments, which it's like nature saving our asses again, because of course, how did these things occur?
As usual.
Humanity, right? Like spilling oil everywhere or whatever. Yeah. So it's possible. It's a very exciting area. It's also, I'm thinking of a good friend of mine who I had on the show, Leif Olson, who participated in this. And nature doesn't always act the way that we expect, right? So we can try and say, like, okay, this particular strain is going to grow really well and help properly remediate this site of, this like dump site. But then actually, like, a whole other strain might take over that is unexpected and do a way better job. So it's like, I think part of this is honestly humbleness of like, we we center ourselves so much as humans, right? We are the center of everything, we're the most important, we know the most, etc. And I think it's a lot more about being open to being taught by forces bigger than ourselves, and when we can be humble to that and cooperate with that, and be more flexible in our thinking, that's when things like, experimental microremediation, bioremediation, creating food forests, things like that can really thrive. It takes that participatory, sort of flexible, knowing that on some places things aren't going to go as we expect, and we are going to fuck up. And that's part of being a person and part of engaging with these living systems. It's feedback, right? We pulse energy in, pulses energy back to us, and we can pulse energy back in, and then it gives it back to us. And it's like that relational dialogue in a way.
Absolutely. I really like your point about the flexibility thing. I think flexibility and just having an adaptive approach is super important in everything in life, because everything is always changing, and we have to be able to adapt and analyze that and change with it. And I think a lot of times the issue becomes people become so rigid and set on one particular methodology that may have worked in a particular instance, but then things change and then they want to stick in particular line of what they were doing before, and it might not necessarily work the second time around. So I think that's a huge important point that you made about that.
Yes. And that, just that point that you just made about like the rigidity, that is the exact situation that we are in largely as a society right now. It's things have been sort of rigidly like stuck in one way. It's scary to change it. It costs money to change it. It's not as profitable for certain people to change it, whatever it is. And then the flexibility is what's required now. The flexibility, the visionary thinking, directing resources in a new way, working together in a new way. That's what we're being asked to do. And just to loop it into psychedelics, like psychedelics help our neural pathways not be so rigid, help them be, stay flexible and open. And that is another huge function of psychedelics, and reasons that I wish, I mean, not every single person, but I think if a lot more people did engage in things, or even just lion's mane, some of these basic supplements that can really help neurological flexibility, um, I think we would approach these larger scale solutions a lot faster.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, with, all of the people that you've interviewed, so many amazing people, and just your investigations and your research, like what are some other big focal points in terms of either major problems and then also major solutions, or maybe alternative energy systems, or just really cool things that you're interested in and excited about that you feel like it would be important to highlight for the listeners to be kind of interested in and look into?
Yes. I think the major one that we're facing right now, okay, two. Um, the first one is community, right? So like doing coming together to share ideas, do this work, like people who are tapping into this podcast value that type of connection, right? um Nothing like this is a team sport, right? We're in the situation now on the planet, as a species, um where we need to collaboratively, there's a phrase, it's like promiscuous promiscuously hybridize ideas and solutions, and be willing to work together. And we see that modeled throughout all of ecology, right? Things collaboratively evolve. They Nothing tries to do it alone, right? It's a communal endeavor. And my experiences working and directing these projects of food forestry, it's not possible to do it alone. And I think part of the invitation of like my work, which I would love to talk about a little bit after this, is inviting people back into this sort of communal um, undertaking of like, how do we approach making the planet better, and regenerating the earth, and also nourishing ourselves. And so community, as I talk about community, as an essential nutrient, because without community, literally our bodies wouldn't exist, right? We've got microbes like even in our eyelashes. We're more a community than an individual organism ourselves. And as we approach this work, I think it's important to honor that and work together in that way. So, community is the first one. The second one is water cycle restoration is huge. As I mentioned, or no, I don't think I mentioned it here. So, drought and flood, which are like, when we look at California, a lot of different areas facing basically desertification. Both drought and flood are consequences of low rainfall absorption. So that's a pretty fixable thing, right? It's like, okay, we need to create opportunities for the rain to absorb into the ground in order to harness the full water cycle and reverse the cycle of flood and drought. So that's something that a lot of people can approach and do just in their yards, even um, creating. I've got an episode with this guy, Zach Weiss, who would probably be really interesting for you to interview too. But even if you just have a little yard, you can observe the rainfall. Like, where is the rain going? Is it running out of your gutter, whatever? And digging small, they're called decentralized water retention features. So, like a ditch, something like that, a rain garden, you can make it into a rain garden where you're planting native plants, where the rainfall is collecting, like I spoke about that guy, Brad Lancaster, doing. And working with the water, participating in the water cycle in a way that's not just drinking and using water in an unconscious way. I think that's an area that's really huge right now, and something I wish everybody would get involved in.
Yeah. Yeah, my parents started collecting rainwater. They set up a couple things at their home. Maybe I think it's probably been about a year or two now, and it's pretty insane. I mean, we don't get a lot of rain here in Arizona. We've been kind of fortunate recently because we've gotten a lot more than usual, but it's amazing how much water you can collect with what's a seemingly small rain, and it makes such a difference. And they're able to, utilize that to feed into their gardens and all that. So I think that's huge. The water thing is so huge. So it's definitely important. Well, what are some other interesting things that you wanted to touch on? And maybe, yeah, talk a little bit more about like the work that you do as well.
Yeah. So I think, you know, I suppose my main exploration of my life at this moment is how do we come together around regeneration in ways that work for us in our modern lives in ways that are accessible. And so, right now I am living on a pretty remote landmass, right? I'm out here in Hawaii, which it's like I didn't necessarily even intend to move here. It just happened in this really synchronistic way. And the way that things have unfolded, I just know that they happened this way because I was supposed to evolve as a person out here the way that I have. Um, so I don't plan on living out here forever. But so I've just been looking at, I've got a handful of uh, close clients that I work with in person here, but a craving that I've had, and that's part of why I started my podcast, was like, I really want to bring this work out. I want to be able to connect with and serve more people who are seeking in terms of like, how do I integrate um, practices that both care for my own spirit and my own self with practices that care for the earth, and how do I bring that into my life? So that's been kind of my creative area of exploration. And what I found is pods, right? To do this work in pods is very transformative. And although what my dream eventually is to have like a place where people can come and learn and be immersively um, taught. But in the meantime, what I'm doing is I have this online course and community. It's called Regenerative Rituals. And we go through these different elemental, it's a sequence of each element and how we can, the mythical historical origins behind working with each element, and then ways to incorporate actionable rituals around them that fit into our daily lives. And it also has a tangible element because I everyone who signs up, I've partnered with, this is going to be my second time running the course. I partnered with a select group of female and non-binary artisans who create these, beautiful, different earth-centered creations. So when you sign up, it's a 6-week course, and then it's almost like an advent calendar, but it's just for the course. So it's like there's a gift that corresponds to each week. So as we go through each element, consciousness, earth, water, fire, at the beginning of the class, we all like open the gifts and kind of use them to integrate the teachings into our lives and ourselves. So that's my area of exploration right now. It's been so fun to teach this way. Oh my gosh, and the people who sign up, I just love. It's it's been such a lovely way to have community, even though we aren't all in the exact same place.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. You're really doing such great work in so many areas. It seems like you said, I mean, everybody, obviously nobody's perfect. We all have our moments. You're
Oh
doing
yeah.
a lot. And the guests that you've had on your podcast, I've listened to a lot of them, and I listened to one, I'm like, oh, I want to interview that person. I want to interview that person. It's
Yeah.
just like you have a really good eye and ear for finding really great speakers that are really knowledgeable about just all of the various subjects and solution oriented individuals as yourself. And I think that the course you're doing is amazing and beautiful, and I hope that it does really well. Is there
Thank
any
you.
other last words or notes or any messages that you want to put out there for the listeners before we sign off on this?
Yes. It's possible, no matter where you are, what your situation is, to help make the planet healthier and to become healthier yourself in that process. There are many, many, many ways to approach this work. They can be beautiful, they can be ritualistic. It's so far beyond just recycle and hope for the best. You know what I mean? This can be a really beautiful, fun communal undertaking. And that is what I want to make sure that everybody knows. And I'm accepting people on my wait list right now who want to be in the next round of the course. We're going to start February of next year. So I think there's 4 spots left. If you want to get in on that, you can just find me on Instagram at Food Forest Goddess.
Right. And then what about, do you have any other links or anything for people to learn more about you?
Yeah, yeah. I've got a website. It's jenningsdesigns.com where you can read my bio and got various articles and things published there. And then, of course, you can go and listen to the Regenerative Revolution podcast where we interview leaders from all across the movement. I've got um, all kinds of just brilliant, brilliant guests on there. And that's a lot of fun too. So even if you don't want to take the course or anything, there's tons of free material there for you to dive into and learn from.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again. And thank you for just all that you do. I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much for interviewing me. It's been such a pleasure.